Excellent. Hey, it's my honor to represent the spine section at this meeting, certainly with such a significant panel that you have on this morning. So I'm looking forward to learning as much as everybody else, I think, right now with regards to sort of where we go next with regards to spine education in this new era. And that the poll you just put up was fascinating. And to see that very few people were expecting us to go back to an in-person meeting. So I think that says a lot as we look towards the future of sort of organized spine conferences throughout the globe moving forward. So when you look at the spine section, and I think all of us as presenters are probably going to tackle our slides. I know we only have about 10 minutes in a different way. And so I thought I would just talk a little bit about sort of what we've done from an educational standpoint and perhaps just leave with some open-ended questions about where we go that maybe we can talk about a little bit more, and certainly as we learn more through the rest of the panelists. But when you look at the spine section, our educational content has largely been delivered through the annual meetings. So we have our own annual meeting, and we were quite lucky. We had our 2020 meeting already. We had it in Las Vegas in March, and we barely just got it in. So if those of us that were at the meeting, many of the panelists are on the executive committee of the spine section, but we basically got there one day, and then the next day, most of us started to have travel bans while we were already there. So it was quite eye-opening. This was right in the beginning as we started to think about what was happening with COVID. But our meeting went off, and it was not such a significant hit. We had about 17 speakers that could not attend due to COVID travel restrictions. But the majority were there, and the majority of the attendees were there. We were down a little bit with regards to attendees, but not significantly. And we were able to really get the meeting off, like I said, without a hitch. So that was good. So our 2020 meeting was done. So we've got to focus on our next meeting, which would be a year from now, right? And so the section also provides additional educational content through the AANS and the CNS annual meetings and beyond. So if you think about anything that the AANS or the CNS put on, and it's with regards to spine content, and this could be practical courses, breakfast and luncheon seminars, scientific sessions, and the existing web-based online courses and webinars that's really run through our educational committee through the DSPN. So we're pretty broad outside of our annual meeting as well, but really the annual meeting is really where our focus has been traditionally on our educational content. And that leads us to then what just happened a few weeks ago, where the AANS meeting was canceled. So that was our next sort of scientific content distribution. And with the cancelization of that, we really had, as far as I know, as right now, all that content just left sitting, where we had, everything we needed with regards to our scientific presentation, abstracts, courses, seminars, all of that put on hold. And now we're looking at ways to get that out and out into the virtual space. And as we're on this meeting today, and we see on email and others, we've seen significant expansion of online and virtual content, which we have been part of as well. We've been part of online grand rounds, online case presentations as well. And with Coy and his group, we as a spine section have been very active in trying to keep at least North American practicing surgeons up to date with regards to COVID impact on their practice. This has been such a significant financial hit on all practices, but especially the small group or private practitioners. We want to keep everybody up to speed with regards to what is happening from a government standpoint. And so Coy and his group, and Minyan and Ali and John Shin and John Rizzulli on this call have been active with social media, trying to keep everybody as updated as much as possible with regards to anything coming out of the government. And our lobbyists in Washington, anything we get, we put out online. This is just a snapshot of our website, just showing that we've always been involved with online content, social media, and we've really just had to ramp this up within the COVID crisis, like probably all organizations are doing as well. We've been actively participating in the virtual professor series. The CNS has put that out with regular spine content, and our spine section members, again, just trying to get content out for people that are hungry for education, and even the CME to some extent, where we're still having a CME requirement, and how are we going to get that out to our members. But I think what would be interesting with regards to this series today is what is the future going to look like for our meetings moving forward. So again, we've been actively involved with sort of the online content, live, virtual, on demand, probably just like everybody else. But really, what is going to happen to our annual meetings as we know it? I think to some extent, we'll know what happens in the fall, as sort of upcoming big meetings, SRS, CNS, we'll get an idea of sort of, can we social gather at that time? What rules are put in place? Will participants even want to attend large meetings? As we saw from our poll, again, many are not expecting to be back. And the impact on this is going to be broad, and how we react to it is going to be broad. And when you look at big meetings, such as the CNS, when will we even be able to social gather? And what will that limitation be? When you look at a meeting that's over 5,000 participants, will we ever get back to that? And if we are, is that this year or is it next year? And so these unknowns are going to place significant impact on annual meetings or big meetings. I think the other thing we've got to consider moving forward is what will institutions do moving forward. So I'm at the Cleveland Clinic. I have a staff meeting tonight with my faculty, and I'm just about to announce that we're not going to be allowed any academic travel through the rest of 2020. So that's all been barred. It's not the cost of travel, it's the cost of having surgeons away and not operating. So large health systems such as mine, and many people that are participating here are hundreds and hundreds of millions dollars behind budget just for the last 2 months. And they want to make that up. So they have no interest in seeing surgeons or other providers being out for vacations plus travel days as well. So they're going to keep us back. And how is that going to affect meetings? I would imagine small and group practices are similar, and the catch up could be years into the future. So again, this is going to impact our meetings. And then lastly, what about industry partners, right? They're taking a significant financial hit here as well. Are they going to be back to supporting meetings as we've known it in the past? Are they going to be able to have the liquid cash to support? Will they send participants to meetings as we've seen that in the past? And I think it's probably going to mirror what we see in large health systems. And then we're just going to have that general feeling around travel. When are we going to feel comfortable as humans to start getting on planes again, traveling, staying in a hotel, going to restaurants, et cetera? So all of those are unknown. And I think what we're doing this morning is a new normal. So it's just completely a new normal. Virtual education has now become completely normal and accepted. We've worked through some of the bugs of virtual conferencing, and we've done it, and it's working well. This is just a good example of what we're doing this morning. So, and probably all of our facilities, all meetings are now virtual. We've basically taken all of our resident and fellow conferences, they've gone virtual. And we actually found them to be much more helpful. We have a greater attendance, there's more interaction. These web-based platforms, which will only get better from this point moving on, really allow you to do this in a very easy way. And we will look at our annual meeting that we had in March in Vegas. We actually had many of the speakers that had travel bans give their presentations virtually, and it actually went really smooth. And so it just showed us that you don't have to have a speaker in a room with people to have that same sort of feel with them. We could do the talk. It was smooth. There could be question and answer with the audience. So for us, this was a good first start and a very simple way of doing a virtual meeting. So I think when you look at this new normal, what are we going to look like? And I think this is interesting for discussion. Are our meetings going to be all virtual? Are we going to have a larger virtual meeting where because we can't social gather in large groups, and then have smaller group meetings, maybe regionally, for any hands-on component that's needed? We're seeing a lot of innovation or significant innovation with AR and VR. Will we even have to have a hands-on education in the future? So I'm at Cleveland Clinic. Our medical school has no gross anatomy class. It's all gone virtual reality, and just showing that, again, the technology is there that we can even do hands-on cadaver type work with virtual reality and not need a cadaver lab perhaps in the future. And can we offer a view of innovation virtually as well? So not just us surgically, but can our industry partners also work with us virtually, exhibitor, buying, selling, et cetera? We'll probably have the ability to do that as well. I think one of the impact here is going to be on scientific presentation. That's one of the values of an in-person interaction, is actually having those one-on-one conversations with people in the audience before or after your talk, where you really can get some insight and some feedback on scientific presentations. And I think this is something that we'll have to think about very seriously. Can you have that same interaction virtually? Will it work the same? And so this is a question that I have. And then what is the future with regards to research and granting ability when you look at our organization. So I don't think we have the answer to all these. I'm interested to see what the panel, how their societies are approaching this. I think we have the luxury of sort of seeing what happens in the next few meetings as we look to our spring meeting in 2021, and we'll be staying nimble. We're planning the meeting now, but we are planning to potentially do this in person, but we're also planning to do it virtually, either all in or partially, as we see what happens in the world moving forward. So on that, there's about 10 minutes. I'll go ahead and stop there, and we'll look forward to questions towards the end. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, Dr. Simons. Really appreciate it. What we'll do is I'll ask Corey to see if there are any, maybe we'll take one question while Dr. Sullivan puts up his talk. Corey,
yeah, for sure.
Question from the audience?
Absolutely, Mike, that was a great talk. And there's a really good question by Ann Stroink, who's joining us today. But what are the section's plans to engage industry partners going forward in this sort of new normal that you've talked about?
I mean, I think that as a section, we work through our industry liaison, our exhibit committee. We've been trying to meet fairly regularly with our larger and even smaller industry partners with early engagement with them. I think we're all still in the unknown right now, and they're a little bit unknown sort of how they want to approach this. But I think what we've always approached as a section is trying to provide value to our industry partners, and we're keeping that that sort of mission with them. And so we're talking with them, we're listening with them, and we're trying to be as nimble as possible so that we can fulfill their needs and their wants as a section, but still be able to maintain their support moving forward. So again, Anna, it's not a perfect question, but I think right now where we're at, it's really a point of just constant dialogue with our industry partners and being an organization that can stay nimble enough to change and alter what we do relative to their needs and our needs.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much. And I know some of these topics will overlap, and we'll definitely shed more light on them and with the other speakers. Dr. Sullivan, President of NAS, thank you for joining us.
I didn't unmute myself first, so let's do that first. Sorry about that. Good morning, everyone. And Dr. Baj, thank you so much for the invitation and for getting us all together. And this is really a very interesting, fascinating topic, and individually, each of the societies sort of has their own, small pieces and idiosyncrasies that we're trying to work through as well. So, NAS is a part of the Council of Medical Specialties societies, among a lot of other societies, including several of those that are on the phone today. And again, we're used to, as medical societies, having meetings where people get together and have social interaction. I did see there was a question about job interviews and things like that. And as Mike mentioned, just the ability to have a one-on-one discussion or get together with colleagues or past fellows and people like that. And so I think a lot of these different societies together we're all in the same boat, and no one has been through this, especially for any of the younger physicians. And if there's any trainees on here, nobody's ever done this before. So it's all brand new. I did want to share a few slides that we had, just a couple slides from the Council of Medical Specialties. And it's just interesting when you look at the graph in terms of the number of meetings that were canceled. Again, you look at the March graph there, and held as planned. There were a couple meetings in early March. I know I had a meeting that first weekend of March and couldn't go to the spine section meeting in Las Vegas. I had a meeting in Orlando in March, that first weekend in March that was held. But you see how many, even at that time, how many meetings were canceled. And you start getting out into the summer months of July, August, September, October, and many of those are scheduled and theoretically proceeding as scheduled. But I think as the slide, the poll mentioned, the numbers showed, a lot of people are feeling like it's just too early to know. So people are still planning for these meetings and proceeding as scheduled, but it may be a little bit early to know. And so this is just again, another snapshot. You look at where a lot of the meetings are held, and a lot of the places that were canceled around the Washington, D.C. area, Chicago, New Orleans, and Florida. And some of those places still have There's meetings that are currently still scheduled, but I think each week that goes by, I think that we get more and more information, and trying to figure out if these meetings are going to be scheduled as they are. And again, just a snapshot of a couple of the meetings coming up in June, July, and in the beginning of August that we still, North American Spine Society actually postponed our meeting in July. And we did that several weeks ago, even though a lot of other meetings are scheduled in July and August, partly based on location. So some places are going to be very interesting, and some meetings are going to be interesting to determine if they're going to be able to go on as scheduled, even based on specific location. And that may even impact meetings that are scheduled in the United States. And so that different areas may be dependent on local or state leadership and the rules and regulations that are set up regarding even the ability to hold a meeting. I'll touch on that and just briefly as it relates specifically to NAS's meeting coming up as well. And so, again, if you look at some of the key NAS and other spine-related meetings that have been canceled, even back in Orlando, the AAOS meeting at the end of March was canceled. NAS had a coding course and trauma course in various locations in April that were canceled. Again, as Mike mentioned, the AANS meeting was canceled in Boston. Spine Week, which is a multi-society meeting that was scheduled for Melbourne, Australia, was canceled. And again, there's a couple other meetings for AO Global Spine meeting in Brazil and our meeting in Bangkok. And again, those, even, when you start thinking about these meetings and you think about, I'll go to a small local meeting, some of those are maybe scheduled or may be easier to attend, but certainly the large international meetings may be very difficult to put off as scheduled. So again, NAS has a couple key meetings still planned that we'll see, and we'll have to try to figure out if people are able to attend or if we'll schedule some of the sessions even more virtually. I definitely agree with Mike. This is the new norm at our institution in our residency program. We've changed to Zoom meetings for nearly all of our didactic presentations. They can be recorded as this is. As long as people have video capability, there can be some face-to-face interaction, so you can see if people are participating or engaged in the conversation. If you just see the top of their forehead, it's a little bit harder. And then our NAS annual meeting is currently scheduled for October 7th through 10th in San Diego. And interestingly, for that meeting, registration just opened very recently, and we're actually at about 84% of where we would be relative to past years. We had a conversation with the Convention Center group last Friday. And again, this is where it's interesting, where we may be dependent on some of the state and governmental restrictions based on gatherings, et cetera. And so trying to figure out, does a scientific meeting like this count as something that, in terms of the state tier ranking, is it akin to a group gathering that's lower risk, or is it something like a music concert that they put at a higher tier level and would be further restricted? So it'll be really interesting to see. And again, what I found really fascinating about this is trying to make plans in a time of very much of uncertainty, and having never gone through this before, that's just the unprecedented nature of everything is very difficult. So currently we're continuing to make our plans, obviously, for the annual meeting, but with contingency. And so really we're kind of thinking about this as three main ways, and Mike kind of touched on this too, is do we have a live meeting as planned? That may be impacted by travel restrictions by universities. Again, different places are restricting travel. International travel restrictions. We may have the government that just says we are not able to have people travel from certain countries. And the convention space, restaurants, hotels, et cetera, those places may have space limitations based on capacity. It's in likelihood, I think a lot of what we're thinking about is potentially a hybrid meeting where we may have some live and some remote presentations. And interestingly, we've actually really NAS has actually already done this as well, so that we've had things that were some of the presentations fit better into this platform, a Zoom or virtual meeting platform, where it can be recorded or it can be filmed. It's more of a demonstration, and that fits very well in terms of a remote presentation with virtual. Now, certainly some of the things that require hands-on or demonstration and then hands-on involvement, like a cadaver course that allows somebody to go in and do hands-on, that's much different. And then the third option is whether or not, and we're even allowed to have any gatherings at all, and airplane travel. And again, I'm fascinated by the poll, because my view, I think I agreed with a lot of people where many people said it's too early to tell. It's really just hard to know because of the uncertainty with the overall situation, and then just everyone's feelings. Like, do they feel safe? Do they want to get on an airplane and travel, cross country? So virtual meetings where everything is virtual, those are probably difficult in terms of planning because no one has really done it in this scope. And those meetings may take longer. Where we hold those virtual meetings, again, maybe dependent on a lot of different factors. So again, having virtual meetings that are centrally located in the country may be better to attract people from both coasts. But that the impact on international attendees shouldn't be diminished either. So in terms of the NAS office response, obviously we've made changes in terms of, as most people have even in their general practices, looking at higher levels of disinfectant in terms of cleaning procedures. And really the message that we're trying to make for NAS staff obviously is to make sure that people, if they're sick, that they're staying home. We've gone from I think a viewpoint early on, as I look back in terms of even what I was thinking in January, was, oh, this is not that big of a deal. The flu is worse, and we've really changed that from let's not overreact to let's not underreact. That has led to a necessity to manage everyone's anxiety and certainty. And when I talk to people in terms of practice as any educational events, it's really trying to manage that anxiety and uncertainty. And then certainly we have really worked to allow staff to work remotely. So when you put that into the context of an organization like ours, we want to allow our organization and our membership and educational efforts to work remotely as well when feasible. So that was all that I had specifically, and happy to answer any questions as well.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Sullivan. Raj, I'll ask Raj Dr. Sethi to put up his slides if you can. And I think what's interesting already from several of the speakers and the comments is, in many institutions, academic travel is suspended for the fall until 2021, and that's going to have a big impact on our national meetings. Dr. Steinmetz, you wanted to say something about that?
Yeah, I mean, I was just wanting to make a comment. I made a blunder in my presentation when we were talking about the big fall meetings that were upcoming that we were watching. I failed to list the NAS meeting, which was just a mini TIA on my end. So I'm just apologizing publicly for that. So sorry.
Great, thank you for that. So we're going to move right along. We will have questions, more questions and answers at the end. We always plan for 1-hour sessions, and we always go over because the discussions are phenomenal. But it is my distinct pleasure to introduce our next speaker, a good friend and colleague, Dr. Raj Sethi from Seattle, who's going to share with us the experience of SRS and what they're planning on and what they're doing. Raj?
All right, Ellie, thank you very much. And it's an honor to represent the SRS. I know that our president, Paul Sponseller, is also on the call. So I think between us, we can do a good job to represent our society. I knew that our partners from NAS and from Spine Section, other sections would have done a great job to talk about the challenges. So I'm going to take this in a little bit of a different direction, which is to talk about how do we maintain ourselves as a global society leading education in complex spine and deformity. And if you look at this graph, you can clearly see that we are growing in terms of our member country count year by year by year. And as now we have the challenges that my colleagues from NAS and the Spine Section have stated vis-a-vis travel restrictions, vis-a-vis the unknown nature of this space. What are we going to do around global education? This virtual platform becomes ever more necessary for us to discuss, particularly with societies like ours that are truly international. Now, the other types of education we have to think about is if you look at our members by type. We have a lot of seasoned surgeons, we have seasoned researchers, we also have this green category that you can see here, which are surgeons in their candidate years, which is a approximately 5-year period where, you know, they are just getting into the society, starting to serve on committees, starting to be active. And, you know, one of the questions that keeps coming up is that, you know, we're social beings, and the in-person education that we get just from mentorships of senior to junior, just from things like coffee and dinner events. These are obviously all going to change, and it's all going to be very different. But this is something that cannot be replaced by a webinar. And so I think as we go forward, our annual meeting is in September, as everybody knows, and it's in Phoenix, Arizona this year. And I know that talking to all of my colleagues that there are, you know, obviously plans for us to have an in-person meeting, just like NAS and some others that are coming up in the fall. But we obviously are looking at what are our virtual capabilities, and likely the meeting will be a mix of some sort, because as mentioned earlier, some international members may not be able to travel, and some institutions, as the Cleveland Clinic earlier mentioned, will not allow their members to travel. Now, I'm on a committee locally here in Seattle at 2 organizations, both at the University of Washington and at Virginia Mason, and we have not made a decision yet on what we're going to do with fall travel for our clinicians and for our academic staff. And so I think that just remains to be seen. The other really important thing for us to think about as SRS members and as SRS leaders is the fact that we have a large OUS membership. And as I mentioned earlier, this is something that is very, very important when you think about just the idea of travel, and the fact that a lot of our international members may not be able to travel to the United States for the foreseeable future. So we have been looking at virtual options very, very carefully going forward. And I think that the virtual space is going to be very, very important to make sure that we include all of our OUS membership and their perspectives in our educational trainees. The other one, I thought this important, I got this slide from our staff, is to look at the fact that neurosurgeons are increasingly entering the field of scoliosis and complex spine, particularly in adults. And so how do we make sure that we continue to show the interest, and also to keep our neurosurgeon members in the front of our efforts? So just some quick words on COVID efforts, and then I'll yield the podium to my next colleague. You know, we have been putting webinars in place already, as have the other societies, with leading some of these current challenges. It started with a member-only webinar on practices around the world, and we had all major regions of the world represented in this webinar, because things in Japan were different than the Netherlands, than the U.S., etc. So I think that was really important. And again, that's where the virtual space really rings true, is with bringing our international perspectives together. We have an SRS member-only COVID-19 message board, which is well populated, and that's something that we have been really looking forward to. I also participated 2 weekends ago in a really important seminar on how you leverage telemedicine and virtual communication for the spine care provider. That has been a huge area of interest in many organizations. And I know that in the comments there was some criticism internally that this was U.S.-centric, and it definitely is U.S.-centric at the current time. But remember that CMS has done some pretty I think game-changing work in how virtual visits can be compensated. So we had a 1-hour webinar that was chaired and led by Sukin Shah on how you can leverage this in your workspace. And so we're continuing the learning and continuing all of the efforts that we had started with. We'd want to do in person. But I'll tell you that just in closing, I think that one of the difficulties that we're going to have is how are we going to encourage cross institutional and cross country mentorship, and a lot of that happens in our big national meetings or big international meetings in the case of the SRS. And so I think that we're going to have some sort of in-person experience. I agree with the poll that was done at the beginning of this session that we don't know what it looks like yet, but some sort of in-person experience will be important for us going forward. We just don't know what it looks like at the current time. Thank you.
Raj, thank you so much. Thank you so much for that wonderful presentation. And I really appreciate you and Dr. Sponseller both being on the call. I can tell you as a neurosurgeon, I really appreciate that comment you made about engaging more neurosurgeons with the SRS, and I can personally attest to that. So thank you for that. And just a plug for our platform here for the Virtual Global Spine Conference platform. A significant number of our audiences, participants are international, and a lot of them have mentioned that, have said that over the next 1 to 2 years, it's going to be easier for them to engage in these virtual conferences due to travel restrictions. And I'm sure the SRS and other organizations, even if they do have an in-person conference, they will carve out a virtual online educational platform for them. That's just been the feedback so far. So thank you very much for that, Raj. We're going to move right along here. Dr. Hirsch, if Dr. Hirsch can put up his slides, it's an honor to present Dr. Joshua Hirsch from the Massachusetts General Hospital. He's a neuroradiologist at the MGH. He's the chief of interventional spine service, and he is representing the American Society of Neuroradiology in his capacity as the president-elect of the organization. Dr. Hirsch, thank you for joining us.
It's a pleasure. Can you see my slides?
Yes, we can.
Fantastic. Well, Dr. Baj, my compliments and my appreciation for being asked to join this auspicious panel. So my compliments on putting it together and my appreciation for allowing ASNR to share its experience. When Wendy Gibbs and John Shin, two very good friends of mine, reached out, I thought our biggest opportunity from the ASNR perspective would be to share sort of from the eye of the storm, but off by a little, how we've dealt with this. Specifically, we had a meeting planned from May 30th to June 4th, and while the retrospective lens is always a very informed one, in real time, the decision-making was challenging, though I think we knew what we needed to do fairly early on. So ASNR 20 was making a great effort to engage internationally, and we were hitting remarkable metrics of success. I would say that in January, we started to recognize we weren't going to be able to bring our colleagues over from Asia, and we began to make, I wouldn't say large-scale arrangements, but arrangements for dealing with that. That was followed by the realization that our friends from Southern Europe probably wouldn't be able to join us. We had a fair number of people coming from Italy, and we're again making arrangements for that. there's a large radiology group called the SIR that was meeting in Seattle. My administrative title here is procedural services. It includes interventional radiology. And when they canceled because they were literally in the eye of the storm, I was making plans for having a virtual SIR here at Mass General, but it soon became apparent that this problem was escalating beyond Seattle. So I think it was important to recognize that we were on pace for what would have been a remarkably successful year. We budget for about 1,700 participants, but we're well on our way to having over 2,000 physicians. So 1,700 physicians, we were on the way to having well over 2,000, we thought. We were actually pushing our room block already months in advance of the meeting, which is fantastic. We were building on some best practices that had worked previously, but also really engaged a broad array of new sponsors. We had set a historic top-line revenue expectation from exhibitors and sponsors, and planned and had been engaging with them in a different way than we had typically. And at the time, we had to make some hard decisions. We were 160% to where we expected to be with that record-setting budget. And we had many more commitments that were on the way to being finalized. The meeting on paper looked similar, but really had developed into a sense of excitement. We had a huge number of invited lectures, new styles for electronic posters, educational exhibits. The other side of my life is neurovascular, though I practice spine. And the first part of our meeting was going to be a 2-day symposium on stroke. Little plug for the audience. There was going to be specialty program from our many friendly societies that work with us. And in person, people would have been able to achieve close to 40 hours of CME with, for us, a very large number of self-assessment modules. Clinical updates are non-CME events. We prepare for industry. They're available for purchase. I will say that we had to come up with more and more of these. We started with 4 morning and went from morning to afternoon to breakfast to just multiple, because there was so much excitement associated with this meeting. And like many casualties, this did really impact us. But I will tell you, there were challenges. Again, when I say the retrospective brilliance we all have, you know, the CDC guidance originally went till May 15th. And I would say, while we constructively engaged with our venue, it's important to recognize that the venues were themselves extremely constrained by what was happening around them, and not necessarily agreeable with our notion that this was an act of God that months in advance we would have to cancel. But again, through constructive engagement, working with Caesars, we were able to come to a cancellation, what I would say are mutually beneficial and agreeable terms, and I'm thankful to Caesars for that. In deciding to go away from having our in-person meeting, we opted to do 2 things. Firstly, our members, like other specialty groups, were being affected by COVID so dramatically because there had been so much emphasis on our annual meeting this year. So we set up a COVID-19 task force. And I mentioned that in particular for one element of it. I mean, I believe this task force has had the effect of really bringing the community together and using a virtual platform much like this one, Zoom webinar series. We've had weekly webinars, and I will share with you that the second webinar had over 700 participants, with people coming in from New Zealand, etc., which is just amazing to me because it was 4 o'clock in the afternoon here on the East Coast. I don't even know that I want to figure out what time it was in New Zealand. And like this platform, our sessions have all needed to run over the hour. The other ones have also been remarkably successful, and we've made a point of making CME available and access available to members and non-members for all of these. And I think it's done wonders to bring our community together, and even, as I said before, bring in non-radiologists into our community, which has been really delightful. Of course, if anyone's interested in seeing the resources, financial, health policy, scientific, this discussion forum we're going to launch, you can get there by going to the ASNR homepage, and there's a single-click navigation to our landing page. ASNR 20 also decided to go virtual. This sounds like an easy decision in retrospect. At that time, there had been two major radiology societies that we knew of that had talked about doing something like this and had opted not to. We felt that there were any number of reasons. One, we had a little more time to set this up. Number two, there was so much excitement for this meeting. Number three, we had fixed costs that had already been sunk into the meeting, as any society would, and I'm not including a favorable resolution with the venue, but things that you would spend money on. The incremental cost of setting up the virtual meeting was really not particularly great. The question was, would people be interested? Would people participate? So there was some debate, but I think I was very appreciative that the board supported the decision making. Wendy is on, I think, our advisory council, so she probably remembers some of those conversations, and I would say there was support for moving forward. The way we're doing it is making really what we think will be a virtual substitute for the annual meeting. So we're having sessions pre-recorded, and there'll be a simulated live format. So people will be able to look at what they'd like to do during the day, and using a streamlined agenda, go to different breakout rooms, different video streams, and we are proud of the fact that we are making this accessible to people with learning disability. I would also say that our abstract presentations are probably getting, in some ways, a bump. We've moved up from 400 to 1,000. We have fantastic e-poster platforms being submitted, and we're encouraging people to get a little beyond what they might have considered with traditional electronic posters. We prepared a bench anticipating that it would be hard to get people to participate, but I have to tell you, at least in terms of commitments, recognizing we don't have everybody's talk, I mean, we are way over 95%. It's my natural conservatism that is leading me to say over 95%. It's close to 100% of people agreeing and being enthusiastic to participate. So the talks will be pre-recorded. We're encouraging people, if they're able, to be available for when their session would go on, and then using the chat function, work with each other to answer attendee questions. I would share with you that another area where we were uncertain, having been so encouraged by where we were on our financials, and I don't want to say counting the revenue enhancement to the society, but in going to virtual, we set a new budget. Again, what I would consider on purpose an aggressive budget. We agreed, the executive director, the president, and myself, on what that budget would be, separate for registrants, separate for exhibitors, and separate for sponsors. It would more than cover our expenses, including all the preloaded expenses, and allow the society to have some profit. And in fact, we are, again, ahead of where we expected to be on those numbers. With 1 month out, we're actually running out of the new clinical update sessions. We've encouraged exhibitors to participate in interactive exhibitor booths. We gave them a lot of choices in order to make this work, and we're probably at about 50% of where we were with exhibitors, probably at about 75% of where we were with sponsors, again, with a full month to go. Perhaps the most amazing statistic to me at this point, remembering that we were, before the Asian portion of the pandemic, when we first started thinking we weren't going to be able to get our members from China or our friends from China and the areas around there, we were looking at what would have been relatively historic attendance at 2,000 plus. And we were very excited and bragging about that. We've already crossed 2,000 registrants, and there's a month to go. We've not really begun to market in earnest because this has been happening so quickly. And what I would make an enthusiastic pitch to this group, in the virtual format, we have over 90 hours of CME available. If there are people that are still not back at work, interested in CME, want to learn more about spine radiology or interventional spine, for non-members with full access to our educational connection, you can come to this meeting for $150. We had a shout out from the Singapore Radiology Society, who we had never engaged with, pointing out the opportunity for their members. And I'm happy to answer questions, but I would just say, if you're interested in learning more about what's going on in neuroradiology and all the focus on spine radiology, please consider yourself welcome. As I mentioned, non-members can participate for $150, which obviously would never be possible in a live format. Again, I want to thank Dr. Baj and the steering committee, not only for inviting me, but having the wisdom of putting together what I think has turned into a really spectacular forum. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Hirsch. That was very kind of you, and we appreciate your representation of our neuroradiology colleagues as well. It's a big part of our mission and this platform. So last but not least, we're going to go to my good friend, Greg Grabowski. Greg, if you're able to put up your slides, that would be great. Dr. Grabowski is representing AO Spine. He's the vice chair of academics at Prisma Health USC. He's also an associate professor at USC and the residency program director. And he's on the education committee and has been for a long time of the AO Spine. We're actually on the committee together, and I'm very, very thankful that he has agreed to come and represent AO Spine. Greg, thank you so much.
Thank you, Ali, for having me, and I really appreciate the opportunity to be a part of this distinguished panel and to discuss something that's obviously been impacting us very significantly across the world, and so obviously a very timely topic. So AO Spine, I do think, is a bit different than the other societies from a standpoint of where our targets are. And so, before I'll even start, and I think that this obviously goes for everybody, the health and safety of our faculty, our members, and our learners are number one, number two, and number three priorities for us. But making sure that we continue to offer good educational opportunities remains important. And I think that where AO potentially fits into a little bit of a different space is who our target learners are. We have a lot of our educational content really targeted at residents and fellows, whereas some of the other larger international organizations allow for resident and fellow education within a smaller subsection of their meetings. We do things that are very specifically targeting those learners. And so I do think that that's a little bit different. I think that people who are residents, they view travel as a different sort of aspect in their lives. They view their timing in training is different. And so as a person 10 years into practice, if I don't get to go to conferences for the next 6 months or a year, that's probably okay for me. But if I'm a resident who has a finite period of time to learn, then all of a sudden taking a significant portion of that time out has a disproportionate impact on me. And so I do think that they are a little bit different from a learner standpoint. The other thing about residents with regards to COVID-19, they're really our frontline people. They're already the people who are in emergency rooms, seeing patients in our academic institutions where people are sick. And And so they are exposed to this at a totally different level than the practicing surgeon or neuroradiologist may be. And so I think that their experience with this pandemic is going to be very different, and it'd be interesting to see what their thoughts on the polls that we gave earlier would have been compared to what faculty members may say. For the sake of time, just to move forward, at present, AO has decided to cancel all in-person learning events through August. That's the short version of the story. And so what does that really mean for the educational offerings that we have? Well, when we were talking about the course we call the Principles in Treatment and Spinal Disorders for Residents, normally we offer that course 6 times a year, with one of those typically trying to be in Canada to reach out to our Canadian constituents. And so the cancellations that we've had have led to a cancellation of a resident course in Las Vegas in April and August in Toronto. Now, the other thing that I would say that it is different about these courses is that they are smaller. We're not talking about a 500 or 2,000 person meeting. We're talking about a meeting that includes 30 learners and 10 faculty members. So the scope is different. And so the question of when these get restarted maybe falls into a little bit of a different category than some of our larger organizations' meetings. At present, we have no plans for rescheduling the canceled meetings. Overall, we kind of have the sense that fall is being overfilled with rescheduled events. And so instead, we're just encouraging our participants to sign up for another, because again, we're hopeful that these smaller types of meetings will be larger meetings. And so with regards to what's happened with our fellows offerings, we typically have a spring fellows course that's in Banff. That's utilized as a format for research presentation. That's actually supposed to be happening right now. And so instead, that's been restructured to a virtual format using Zoom over the course of 3 days. That's going to end up including a research poster presentation, a scored competition, just like we would have had at the regular conference and like we would have at other major conferences. We typically also in September have a fall cadaver course. This has already been mentioned, but they're really at some level for surgical training has there's little way to simulate virtually a true cadaver experience for surgical training. And so our hope is that we really will be able to still move forward with that, but we are looking at other opportunities if that's not going to be a possibility. In terms of our member opportunities, one of the things that we offer every year is probably a little less important for our neurosurgical colleagues, but on the orthopedic side, I think you guys are going to this, where you have to present your own cases, and so that occurs every year in July in Chicago. And so AO Spine does a oral board review course at the end of June for that. That was scheduled for June 26th and 27th as an in-person event. That's obviously going to be canceled as an in-person event, but really what we're waiting on in terms of deciding how we move forward with that is what the American Board of Orthopedic Surgery is going to do, and whether or not they're going to hold their event in July or be able to hold their event in July, or if they're going to go to a virtual type of scenario. And obviously if they go virtual, then it makes a lot of sense for us to do the same. The other major course that we have planned is a advanced course on managing complications. Again, these are smaller courses. It's scheduled in October. Usually we're talking about a 30 to 50 person attendance with faculty involved. And again, the hope is that by October, we'll be able to still move forward with that. But obviously that's going to be dependent on what's going on at that point in time. AO Spine's been recently heavily invested in webinars even prior to this, and so we continue to have that as a platform of webinars per year. 6 of those targeting fellows, 6 targeting members and residents. Those that are still to go for the year are listed here. There's no charge for the member or resident webinars, so anybody can log on to those. And I've included a link in case anybody is interested in any of those offerings. In terms of future decisions, AO Spine leadership typically meets on a quarterly basis. We've had ultimately 2 meetings in the last 2 months for management of this crisis. I'm sure all of the other organizations are doing the same things. At present, again, we've made those decisions through August. Our next meeting is in June, and then that's when we're going to start making decisions about fall. But that's all I have. So thank you, Ali.
Great, thank you so much, Greg. And I apologize to everybody for running a little bit over time. I think, as we can all see, these are very important topics, and they impact us in real ways. Coy, what we'll do is, Coy, we'll probably take another 5 minutes of questions and answers. I think only Dr. Steinmetz had to run to the OR. So Coy or any of my other colleagues, Jonathan or Wendy, if you have any questions for our panel from the chat room.
For sure. There's a couple of good questions from the chat room. So a lot of emphasis in the chat room has been placed on the value of in-person meetings for networking, let's say for people who are looking for jobs. Have any of the societies come up with sort of outside the box thinking to help facilitate this in a virtual manner?
I'll start. I don't know can you hear me? This is Josh Hirsch. This is with respect to, it's a 2-part answer. Last year, a networking opportunity was started in the meeting in Boston. It was called Connections Night. And we actually had rented out the Omnia nightclub in order to facilitate that. Working with our young partners, a committee I've tried to put myself on in order to become young again. Working with our young partners, we're continuing with mentoring opportunities virtually. I will I'll also say that our webinar, not tomorrow, which is on how do you emerge, but the one after that is dedicated to trainees and what it means for them. And again, everyone is invited. The webinars are free and there is CME credit. What I would say is that, you know, people in organizational leadership, staff, do worry a bit about what our annual meetings are going to look like in the future. And what I would say is they will be supported by these virtual components, but they're not going to disappear. After the shock of this type of problem, I would imagine there will be, once again, an emergence of meetings where people get to network because of the criticality of that, despite all the advantages we're enjoying with the virtual format.
And this is Bill Sullivan from NASA. I agree with Josh. We've talked even in the years past, you know, as we looked at some of our meeting attendance and fluctuations and trying to think of younger members coming out. Do they want these, you know, to travel, as is mentioned earlier? Specific to the question, though, this is, again, I mean, nobody is used to this. NAS, through their Interventional Spine and Musculoskeletal Medicine group and their fellowship for non-surgeons, specifically our primarily our physical medicine and rehab fellowships, we've actually moved to a virtual interview process because of the limitations, but you know, time still goes on, and so we're really trying to make adjustments to the process. I really do feel for people, you know, when we're actually, you know, those of us on the other end that are looking to hire as well, we're struggling with the problem of not being able to really figure out, is this a great fit? There's some benefit, obviously, to seeing faces and doing a Zoom meeting, but nothing like going out and having the person and taking them out to dinner. And so it's a double-edged, you know, 2 sides of the coin, I guess, for trying to figure out the hiring process for sure. So there's a lot of limitations to the situation, but we're going to try to make the best of it, I think.
Great, wonderful. Coy, we have time for only one more question. Would you like to go ahead and unmute yourself?
I think a question came up earlier that was of particular interest, but how have the different societies handled corporate sponsors for a canceled meeting? Has the money been refunded? Has the money been pushed to the following year, et cetera?
I can go first again. The first principle we had was your money is refunded if you want it. It's not, we're not going to hold it hostage. And we didn't even study our legal footing for that. We felt that relationships are not about putting people in bad positions. What we said was, we're going to be launching this virtual product. Here are some of the alternatives we would propose to you. And I think we worked to make creative opportunities. And I'll speak broadly because I think it would differ for each society. We allowed people or companies to roll over their contributions to the next year. We encouraged participation at a relatively low price as an exhibitor. If you rolled over, we allowed you to exhibit. In terms of sponsorship, we adjusted the pricing of our options and of course remove things that would no longer make sense because, for example, there were no key cards, but where we could make virtual options, we would. I think in future years, we would actually do even better with the virtual option. I think we are sensitive to the fact that if you look at the interventional world, the business is way, way down for many of these companies. And some of the companies we deal with have furloughed employees, et cetera. It's hard to push companies in that context to give money to a society, but as their businesses normalize for meetings that are later, I think they appreciate the opportunity to continue to engage with different societies.
Thank you, Dr. Hirsch. Raj, can I have you just say the last word on that question? What's SRS doing in terms of these refunds and reimbursements?
Yeah, so I would agree with Josh on his comments. Is that this is a partnership and there's a relationship and it's a longstanding one, and so obviously if money is desired back, it goes back. I think that it's very, very key to think about the point that Josh also mentioned, which is that they're hurting right now. They furloughed a lot of their employees, all across the board, and the capital is just not there to support a lot of these things. So we, obviously we'll be in a different situation a year or 2 years from now, but in the next year, we are expecting less industry funding for all of our activities. And obviously the virtual space is going to help us save money. I think the other really important point for us is we are a world society, as I showed you with our membership, and a lot of our members are not going to be able to travel for the foreseeable future to for example, this year to Phoenix, which is our annual meeting. And so, but we are actively in discussion to have, more and more virtual content. And I think just as the telemedicine example at many of our institutions, this unfortunate crisis kind of kicked us in the rear to get telemedicine going quicker. I think this crisis is going to help all of our societies and academic centers really move closer and faster towards the virtual world, which is, I think, essential and will increase our footprint. So I think it's a good thing for everybody.